Good evening and welcome to this Bolton Council Corporate and External Issues Scrutiny Committee being held on Monday the 12th of April 2021. The time is just after 6 p.m. and I am Councillor Richard Sylvester, the Chair of this Scrutiny Committee for this municipal year at Bolton Town Hall. We are joined this evening by members of the Place Scrutiny Committee for an item on the agenda regarding Bank Street demolition, which also comes under the remit of that Scrutiny Committee. I would therefore like to welcome members of both Scrutiny Committees, our Bolton Councillors, our Bolton Council officers, and to members of the public if you are watching this meeting live via the Bolton Council website or the recorded version on the Bolton Council YouTube channel. Our committee clerk this evening is Vicky Ridge, and you will hear Vicky's voice throughout the meeting as I consult with her. And our technical officer is John McMurray, and John's role is to make sure that the meeting runs smoothly by moving the camera from speaker to speaker. But please do bear with us just in case there are any technical difficulties. Behind me on the first floor of Bolton Town Hall is the original entrance hall, known as the Hall of Remembrance, dedicated in 1928 to those that fell in the Great War of 1914 to 1919, and which houses the Roll of Honour. The front portico of the Town Hall is presently sealed off because of major heritage restoration works. However, if you were able to enter through the original front door of the Town Hall, at the top of the steps, this is the view which you would see of this historic building. Indeed, Her Majesty the Queen and His Royal Highness, the Duke of Edinburgh, entered through the Hall of Remembrance on their official royal visits to Bolton Town Hall in October 1954 and November 1988. Accompanying Her Majesty and His Royal Highness on their 1988 visit was leader of Bolton Council at the time, Bob Howarth. Bob served as leader of Bolton Council from 1980 to 2004. He served as a Bolton councillor between 1958 to 1960, 1963 to 1966, and 1973 to 2004. He also served as Member of Parliament for Bolton East between 1964 to 1970. Her Majesty the Queen and His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh also visited Bolton and Warburton's Bakery in May 2009. Greeting them on their visit was Mayoress of Bolton, Delise Critchley. As this is the first public council meeting following the deaths of His Royal Highness Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, and Robert Lever Howarth, Honorary Alderman and Honorary Freeman of the Metropolitan Borough of Bolton, and Delise Critchley, Mayoress of the Metropolitan Borough of Bolton 2009 to 2010. We will now observe a 1-minute silence in remembrance to them. Would members and officers please mute your microphones throughout the silence. Thank you. Item 1 on this evening's agenda is declarations of interest. If any member has an interest, please would you unmute your microphone now and declare it. There are no declarations of interest. Item 2 is urgent business. Is there any urgent business, Vicky?
There's not, Chair.
Item 3 is apologies for absence. Are there any apologies for absence, Vicky?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I've got apologies from Councillor Connor, Councillor Evans, Councillor Hornby and Councillor Gibbon is deputising, and Councillor Cunningham.
Thank you, Vicky. So we note those apologies. Item 4 is the minutes of the previous meeting. This was the meeting held on the 11th of February 2021. We have 10 pages of minutes from that meeting. If members have anything that they would wish to raise or any questions on those minutes, please unmute microphone and let me know. As is customary, we'll go through the minutes page by page, starting on G1. Now, actually, at the bottom of G1, we had a item under item 24, and I just want to check with Vicky if contact was made with the Greater Manchester Police for contact details of officers.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, I did contact the police, but I'm still waiting for the information. I will chase again, and as soon as I've got it, I will circulate it to members.
Thank you very much. And we go to, therefore to page G2, G3, G4, G5, G6, G7, G8, G9 and G10. Nobody's raised any matters on those minutes, so could I ask a member if they would move those minutes as a correct record, please?
Move them.
Thank you. Could I have a seconder, please?
Second them.
Thank you. And would members say aye if they agree the minutes, please?
Aye.
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 Thank you very much. So those minutes are agreed. We therefore go to item number 5 on the agenda, and this is a presentation which our Borough Treasurer and our Borough Solicitor, Sue Johnson and Helen Gorman, will take us through on the Bank Street Demolition Contract. So we'll go over to Sue and Helen, please.
John, I think you're coming to me first, please. Thank you. Can we have the next slide, please, John? So we've been asked to bring a presentation to the Corporate Scrutiny Committee, augmented with members of the Place Scrutiny Committee, to give members further information about the demolition contract which was entered into for some premises at Bank Street. Members will note from the first slide that we're not naming the two contractors who were involved with this project. If we were to name the contractors, we would have had to go into Part B and the public would have been excluded. The council also has a continuing relationship with these contractors. So that's the explanation as to why we're not using the contractors' names. Members will see that the project began in oh no, thank you, John. Panicked me slightly. Members will see that the project began in 2017. Contractor A, a firm of structural engineers, was appointed to assist with designing the specification because officers realised that it was a complex specification. There was a part of the process that the contractor felt could not be allowed, and that was to do specific groundwork investigations. Before contractor B submitted their bid, they asked to go on site to do an inspection, but this was refused on health and safety grounds. In May 2019, the contractor was appointed to carry out the works, and it was anticipated at that point in time that it would be completed by July 2019. The contract sum, the original budget, was £395,000. Very early in June, as you'll see from the slide, authorisation was given to increase the contract sum by an extra £50,000 to undertake works that had previously not been anticipated. Could we go to the next slide, please, John? It has to be pointed out that this contract, these works began whilst the Corporate Property Service was still within the council. It was still an internal function of the council. And in about May 2019 is when we entered into the contract with Robertsons to do facilities management and estates work. However, this contract didn't pass to Robertsons. And Chair, I'm happy to take questions as we go along. I don't know how you want us to do this. Do you want me to finish the presentation and then take questions, or what would you like to do, Chair?
Thank you, Solicitor. I think if you finish the presentation and we'll take questions at the end.
Thank you. So the contract, the demolition contract work didn't pass to be managed by Robertsons, although they did agree that they would provide some additional project management support to the council in September 2019. However, Robertsons made it very clear that the risk would remain with the council, as you can see from the slide. In early February 2020, a further increase was made in terms of the contract value, and between February and June 2020, no additional costs were passed. No information about additional costs came forward to the council from Robertsons. You'll see at the bottom of the slide that on the 22nd of June 2020, the final account was issued, which was nearly £900,000. The budget that had been approved was just over £500,000, and we finally settled the contract price at £775,000, which included £10,000 of legal costs from contract B. Next slide, please, John. So a very clear issue that we've identified when the Deputy Chief and I have gone back and looked at this project was that the necessary investigations didn't take place prior to going out to tender. In total, there were 16 notices to vary the contract, as you can see from the slide. Not all of those variations were agreed, but in total, there were nearly £600,000 worth of variations. And as you can see from the slide, the vast majority of those additional costs related to redesigning the demolition works and propping costs, just over 60% of the total additional cost. Next slide, please, John. When the final account was received, the project manager disputed the final account, but failed to serve the necessary legal notices, which would have enabled the council to challenge the final account. We were informed in the summer of 2020 that we were heading towards legal proceedings if we didn't settle the final account. And in September 2020, we received notice that Contractor B had started adjudication proceedings. Legal advice at that point in time confirmed that because the council hadn't served the necessary notices, it would be unable to dispute the final account. Dispute resolution began, which led in a reduction in the final sum paid to Contractor B. We needed, we needed Executive Cabinet member approval to settle the claim, and this was then settled the following day. Next slide, please, John. This slide just details the final figures that we referred to earlier, and I'm now going to hand over to Jerry Brough.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you, Helen. I'm not sure if I'm on live yet. Can everyone hear me? If they can't, Chair, I'll just, yeah, there we are now. Thank you, Helen. As you can see from the figures, the These are the four key numbers that that were outlined in Helen's previous presentation. The original budget of 395 and the final budget of 513. So we agreed an increase in cost of just under 119k during the course of the project, and that was primarily to deal with additional work associated with what was a complicated project by the nature of the site. There was additional propping that needed to be done to both the riverbank and to the road adjacent to Bank Street that had not been allowed for in the original tender, and also propping to a third-party wall, because when they started to demolish buildings on Bank Street, there was the danger that the third-party wall with Diamonds nightclub at that time would collapse, and therefore the substantial amount of propping had to be done to safeguard that premises. So myself and my team were agreed to increase the budget to 513,942 to allow for these additional works. As you see, when the final bill came in at £895,929, that meant that we had a disputed amount of just under 382,000 between what we regarded as the approved amount and what the contractor regarded as their claim. As Helen indicated through a discussion with the contractor, we agreed an extra payment of just over 261,000, which meant we reduced their claim by 121,000. I think the key point here is that had we known that these costs were being incurred, we would have contested each of the individual variations along the way, and there is a chance that the gap between the final account and the final budget could have been reduced even lower than 775. Can I move on to the next slide, please? So looking at the project and looking back into the project, sorry, there are a number of lessons clearly that I've learned, and a number of issues that are quite evident. The first one was the nature of the brief and the procurement based on the lowest cost. This is not simply an issue related to this particular project. It's one that's prevalent in many contracts in past years, and that's part of the reason why when we introduced the strategic asset management plan, we put in place a tender process that allows us to have a number of gateways, both to assess the concept and design and do that assessment through specialist companies before going out to procure a principal contractor. Next slide, please. The second issue that clearly became apparent was that because partly of the failure to specify the work, an inadequate budget was provided to allow for any potential abnormal or unforeseen costs. We knew this was to be a complicated project, so one would have assumed or expected that a substantial amount of funding would have been allocated for contingencies, because there was a high likelihood that abnormal or unforeseen costs would be incurred. And again, as part of our SAMP policy and principles, the process now is clearly defined through a series of 5 gateways, so that each one of these is a kind of go, no go decision, which involves senior management in that process. And again, this is an attempt by us to address the issues related to failure to allow sufficient budget at the outset. Next slide, please. Indeed, we've gone further than this, and we've actually added a 6th gateway since that, in the light of the Bank Street project, whereby we will now review all projects at project close to review any lessons learned from that project. So we've now effectively introduced a gateway 6 to the process. Next slide, thank you. At the nub of this issue or this contract, I believe, and I think we all agree, is frankly inadequate contract management. And I've got to be honest and say that that's not a lesson you should have to learn. I mean, we should be able to manage contracts better, and in this case, we didn't manage the contract as it should have been managed. The primary responsibility for that, I feel, lies with the project manager. But since this project has, since we've looked at this project, we've now built in additional controls to ensure that the project manager is not given as much leeway and as much independence as maybe he was in the past. We've done that by building in a number of controls throughout the process, including monthly governance meetings, independent audits directed by the council and so on, and professional contract manager appointed throughout the contract. Additionally, two smaller but equally important factors have come to light when we looked at this project and how it was managed is when decisions were made or were needed to be made, not enough time was often given to consider these decisions in full, and particularly when it came to the final arbitration award, we needed to give more notice for members to consider that and avoid the need to exclude these decisions from Colin. But because the legal case had to be settled effectively the day after it was discussed at ECM, there was no opportunity for members to exercise the rights to Colin. And then the final issue that really is raised is the fact of the form of the contract. In this particular case, the contract was a contract issued by the National Federation of Demolition Contractors. Now, you can assume from that this is a contract that fairly well favours the demolition contractor and not the client, in this case the council. This is not a contract we would ever be using again. We now are on standard construction contracts, and that's something that again is introduced as part of our strategic asset management policy to ensure that we are using contracts which are more evenly balanced between the contractor and the council. I think that's the main issues that we've flagged up as a result of the review of this project. I know Rob Holt from Robertson is with us tonight, and I just want to give him the opportunity to comment on the contract from his side, and for him to indicate how they have responded to some of the issues that I've raised in the presentation. So if it's okay, Chair, perhaps I can hand over to Rob Holt, who's the Director with Robertson. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. Sorry, Chair, can you hear me?
Yeah, but you'll need to switch your camera on, Rob.
All right. Apologies. Thank you, Jerry, for that introduction. Clearly, Jerry's been through and highlighted a number of the key issues through the presentation. From our point of view, we've also put in place a robust process to make sure that any contract that we're involved in going forward has the right budget from the outset, and we've got the right team and the right processes. So from a Robertson perspective, we have a gateway process ourselves, one before we approach the feasibility right at the start of the project, and we also now have an ongoing process to check each of the projects as we move through them, just to make sure that this never happens again. And clearly, as Jerry's outlined, there is a process within the council where Robertson have to report into the council at the same time. So we now feel that we've got a very, very good process in place to make sure this never happens again. Because from a number of perspectives, one, from a reputational perspective, and two, from a financial perspective, we just can't afford to let this happen again. And the other, I think, major point that we now have as part of the team in Bolton is we've got a very robust project management team and a commercial team to make sure that all of the processes, all of the checks and balances, all of the contracts that are now signed and move forward are properly and adequately managed to make sure that this does not happen again. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you to Helen, to Jerry and to Rob. A number of members have indicated that they wish to speak and ask questions. So first of all, we'll go over to Councillor Akhtar Zaman, who has a number of questions. So we'll go over to Councillor Zaman. Councillor Zaman.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just say what a mess this is? This is my initial reaction, but I have got some real questions here. Firstly, according to the presentation, the sum of 395,000 was agreed in May 2019, and then in June 2019, which is 1 month later, an increase was granted, 443,276. Could somebody tell me, when did they move on site? When did they actually go on site to start work? Chair, can somebody answer that question?
Yes, it's an open question. I think Jerry Bro, our director of Place, is going to answer that question.
Yes, Chair. They would have gone on site when the original contract was approved, within days of that contract being approved, and then having gone on site, realised that there was additional work over and above what they'd quoted for in 2017-18. So the quote that we had for the contract, if you recall, was actually received sometime before the actual contract was approved.
Okay, thank you, Jerry. So the original sum was agreed in May 2019. The budget was then increased to 443,276 in June 2019, and I assume between the first approval and the request for increase, the contractors moved on site. And then the next increase was in February 2020. Who gave these two approvals? I assume, was it under delegated powers, Chair?
Through you, Chair, I can answer that.
And was executive member informed of these increases?
Chair, no, this is done through delegated authority. It was me who authorised both of the increases. You'll see that in the second increase, in fact, the contractor asked for an increase considerably more than I approved, and I had to renegotiate or negotiate a reduction in their claim by 38,589. I was content at that point in time and had been reassured that this was the final additional claim that would come forward for the contract, and therefore I was willing to authorise it just slightly above £500,000, 513,000, on the understanding, on the assurances received from the project manager, that this would be the final claim. I then did not receive any indication from anyone, either the project manager or anyone in the team, or indeed the QS, the engineering company that were originally asked to help us monitor the contract. I received no indication from then until the final account that there was any additional costs associated with this project.
Right, okay, thank you. And Chair, between February 2000, I assume, February 2020 and June 2020, the project manager made no contact with us in relation to any additional costs. And then we found out in June 2020 that there was a bill of £895,929 outstanding. Now, once we learned this, it took us 4 months to bring a report to the executive member in early October 2020. Could somebody advise us why it took 4 months to bring such a serious matter to the executive member meeting, please?
I'll start this, and then I think Helen might want to come in and just explain the legal situation. But the first thing obviously we did was we checked with the project manager as to why we received the final bill, which was considerably more than the amount approved. We were informed that he had disputed the invoices that were submitted, from the contractor. However, the contract is quite clear that it's not sufficient to dispute these verbally. You have to dispute them in writing, and you have to make it clear to the contractor that you do not accept the invoice. If you do not do that within a certain period of time, then the invoice becomes automatically payable. And so we had to ascertain that from a legal standpoint. Did we actually have to, were we actually obliged to make these payments? And we subsequently found out that yes, we were, or we would have very little chance of winning at arbitration or judgment because of that, what they call pay less notice. We did not give them notice that we were wanted to pay less than their invoice. I'll hand over to Helen because I think she can explain the legalities and why that just takes time to resolve.
Yeah.
Am I okay coming in, Chair? Thank you. I think this is something else that we didn't do particularly well. I think we should have brought a report earlier to members for consideration, and I think officers thought that I would use my delegated authority to settle the claim, whereas for me, my mantra to officers is always, whilst you have the power to do something, you should always question whether or not you should use that power. And this is exactly the sort of case where officers shouldn't use their delegated authority to settle this sort of claim, because members need to be cited on it. So that's one of the, I think that's one of the issues stroke lessons learned that we had in the slides, that officers need to be reminded that when it's something like this, which is reputationally damaging and very sensitive, then it's absolutely something that should be brought to members. I still think that the way that we managed it in October was the only way we could manage it at that point in time. And I'd give the same advice that this sort of decision shouldn't be able to be called in to be scrutinised, because sometimes legal proceedings just demand that we act in a particular way, and there are certain deadlines that we can't change them. So I would still advise in exactly the same way again, because we just have to from a legal point of view. But it certainly should have been coming before members earlier on, delegating authority to settle the claim, but it would still have been confidential at that point in time. And I would say again that this is the right way to scrutinise what happened. Members are still able to scrutinise it. It's just we were in a position that we couldn't do anything else from a legal point of view. I hope that explains.
Yeah, can I come back? That this is very helpful from Helen. But we as custodians of public funds, we have responsibility to protect the public interest, and I'm afraid I have to say, in relation to this, I am not at all satisfied that we have done this in relation to this particular project. I mean, the initial budget was 395,000. In the end, we ended up paying £775,000, which is 380,000 more than what was agreed from the outset. And the process, from what I have heard so far, it does not give me any assurance whatsoever that this was a legitimate sort of payment that we made. That's the sort of work which was carried out, because I've got a hypothesis here. Has anybody thought about this project manager, whoever that project manager was? And I'm not having a go at Robertson's at all. This project manager contacts the local authority on a regular basis up until February 2020, and then all of a sudden there is no connection between the local authority and this guy, or this person, between February 2020 and June 2020. That is when the cost has gone through the roof. Am I wrong to think that there could be some kind of collusion going on between the contractor and the guy who's managing this contract? It really raises a lot of questions, and I am not sure if that area has been explored by somebody within the authority or within Robertson's. What is going on here? Is there some kind of criminality within this. Thank you.
Chair, yeah, I'll just respond to that, and then I'll possibly ask Rob Holt to come in, since he's the director of Robertson's who employed the person that we're discussing. On the issue of the timing, it isn't the case that the project was running right up until we received the final invoice, of course. So there's nothing untoward about the fact there was no dialogue between the project manager between the February and receiving the final invoice, because the project would have been finished some months before the final invoice arrived. But he should have notified us of the fact that he had disputed invoices verbally, and had he done so, then he would have been advised that it's not enough to dispute them verbally, you need to dispute them in writing. There's enough people within Robertson's and within our team to give him that kind of advice. The fact of the matter is, I can't answer the question on collusion, but the fact of the matter is, for whatever reason, the project manager, either through omission, because he didn't realise that the contract required a written confirmation, or or intentionally. I can't imagine why he would have done that intentionally, because the repercussions for a professional in this particular situation are quite severe, and I'll leave Rob Holt to indicate exactly what these might be. But I do think that my own view of this is that that this was a negligence on the part of the project manager, not understanding the contract and understanding that if he didn't dispute these in writing, then they automatically became payable. And that was the real key thing that I don't think he'd grasped at the time.
Can I come back, Chair? With respect, Jerry, I understand that, but what gives me cause for concern is that the first two increases happen as a matter of course, and we are informed, the local authority is informed through proper channels to agree that. But when there's a big increase, nobody tells us anything, verbally or in writing. That is what concerns me. And I mean, I may be stepping too far, but I have to say this because we are representing the Bolton people here. Has this been looked into? Has this possibility been looked into, that there could be, some element of criminality involved in this?
Chair, through you. Sorry, I'll just wait for the camera to come over to me, Chair. Chair, through you. So the process is this: the contractor issues an invoice. The project manager says, "I don't agree with that invoice." The contractor realizes that he has to get that in writing, and the client only has 3 weeks to give him it in writing. He doesn't receive anything in writing, so he thinks, right, that's one, I'll put that in the bag, that's one that will go on my final invoice. He then issues another invoice, and the project manager says, I don't agree with that invoice, and he waits 3 weeks and doesn't get any written confirmation, so he thinks, well, that's another one I'll put on my final account. And so this is not one big amount, this is a number of different invoices, which clearly the contractor was aware were not being properly contested, and was basically just putting each one of these in the bank, because he knew when he came to issue his final bill that he had the contract on his side which said, because we'd not notified him correctly, we had to pay them. He then is in a position of negotiating down from what he regards as the maximum amount of work on the contract. We think we have an actual amount that we think that was spent on the contract, which actually would have been higher than the amount we approved. So had they been asking regularly to have an increase, we would have looked at each one and said, well, actually, there is some merit in this. It was a complicated project, and it's not unusual for contracts of this complexity to double in price. You see that all the time in contracts around the country in various areas. We would have looked at each invoice and said, this is reasonable or this is not reasonable, and we would negotiate each one of these variations. So I think what we were denied was the opportunity to negotiate each one of these variations as they occurred, and to see that they were continually escalating. That was denied us, I think, or me as a director. And I think at the end of the day, we would reasonably contend that there is more than £513,000 worth of work being done. We don't believe it's as high as 895,000. We think it's somewhere in the middle. As we've settled at a figure which is 2/3 in favour of the contractor and 1/3 in our favour. And possibly, had we been negotiating these on an individual basis, it would have been the other way around. So there is an element of value in that contract that you could contest. But at the end of the day, the contractor believes they spent 895,000 on the contract. We don't think they've done that, but they're using Waitrose prices. We're using Lidl prices. I don't know how but that's a reasonable analogy. So there is been extra work done over and above the original contract value. But we don't believe it's as high as the settlement figure. We think we could have got it down a good bit lower had we been able to contest these variations as and when they came in. I don't know if Rob, if you want to say something about the behaviour of the project manager and what your reaction to that as a company has been.
Thank you, Jerry. Yeah, it's I think just to pick up on a couple of points, Councillor. First of all, I think Jerry is correct that the value of the work is we've done quite a lot of work since, obviously, to track through the process to understand what's actually happened. So we think the value of the work is actually higher than the value, and I think again the root cause of this, it goes right back to the contract administration. Once there was a variation provided by the contractor, that was never challenged or was not challenged appropriately. So what should have happened, as Jerry writes to say, a pay less notice should have been raised. It should have been discussed with the council and then sent to or challenged with the contractor. That never happened. And in fairness to both Helen and Jerry, by the time anybody found out about it, there was very little time with which the council had the opportunity to go back and challenge the contractor. So this was really about contract administration, about an individual, as Jerry said, probably not knowing the contract as well as he should have done, not issuing the relevant notices, and ourselves at Robertson, and we weren't aware of the problem until probably the same time as Jerry was aware of the problem, and Helen was already trying to settle the agreement with the contractor. So I don't think there's any question of collusion, Councillor, to be perfectly honest, because we have done some work into that ourselves. But I think, as Jerry rightly said, it could have been handled a lot better, and it purely, we think, comes down to poor contract administration.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just come back very quickly? This is very helpful. But having said that, this is about public perception. Yes, if you put this information out in front of Bolton people, nobody would believe it. Nobody would believe you, right? Based on what we've got in front of us, it's just a total mess, and we've got to learn a lot from this. Thank you very much. I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zaman. We'll go over now to Councillor Bob Allen. Councillor Allen.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I had a question and some comments. My question, Councillor Zaman has really asked already, and that was why we had missed the boat in terms of getting a legal claim in to contest the amounts in the various accounts. So Helen, I think, has answered that. So I won't pursue that, but I will make a couple of comments that I had. First of all, I want to thank officers for the candid approach to this and the transparency. It's not easy to admit that things went so badly wrong as perhaps they did in this case. So I want to thank officers for that. In a previous life, some members will know that I managed a huge electrical contracting business, so I'm quite familiar with the contract law and the issues surrounding that. Dealing with local authorities was always regarded, not just by me, but by my peers in the industry. Dealing with local authorities was always regarded as a bit of a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it was difficult to deal with local authorities in a contractual manner because they didn't often know what they were doing. But on the other side of the sword, there were advantages, namely, they didn't know what they were doing. And that led to the opportunities for contractors, subcontractors and main contractors. It led to the opportunity of winning the tender at a very competitive price, at a low margin, and then knowing full well that you would win hands over fist in variations and extras, because the project had been badly specified, there were lots of holes in it, lots of opportunities, and we knew in advance that local authorities could not keep up, or usually could not keep up, with the rate of variation orders that the contractor put in. And that seems to be what's happened here. The contractors submitted lots of variations, probably mostly legitimate, some perhaps a bit less so, but the local authorities, the project managers, simply not kept up with them. And therefore we get to the stage of the final account when we then have to enter into negotiations and a dispute. So that's the kind of background. It's sort of double-edged sword. The problem with the situation we're in now is everybody thinks they're an expert in these things, and actually very few people are. Contract law is a minefield, as I'm sure Jerry knows, and other members on here this evening know that full well. Contract law is a minefield, and if you're not an expert in it, if you've not been trained in it, then frankly you are doomed. You'll be taken to the cleaners by any contractor, and so the fault seems to be with our project manager. I think it's an expensive, just to sum up, it's an expensive lesson, a very expensive lesson. But I am satisfied, or at least I'm satisfied that we seem to have learned the lessons. And the last few slides about the lessons learned, and Jerry's presentation in particular, give me some confidence that we have learned from this expensive mistake, and perhaps we won't make the same mistake again. So an expensive lesson, hopefully we've learned. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Allen, and we'll go over now to Councillor Nick Peel. Councillor Peel, please.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I'd like to echo some of the things that Councillor Allen just said. His experience working in contract as basically he's just summed up what a lot of us in local government have felt for a long time. In fact, a lot of people in public sector have felt for a long time, which is basically some contractors see us coming and they, for want of a better word, rip off the public sector. I didn't agree with his conclusion that there seems to be some kind of inevitability in what Councillor Allen said, that, you know, this is what happens. Surely this is precisely the reason we employ specialist organisations or contract specialist organisations like Robertson's, and they presumably subcontracted the contract manager. You expect a contract manager to be aware of legal proceedings. I'm sure Councillor Allen was a contract manager in a previous life. He would have been aware of those legal proceedings, that the basic steps that you go through when dealing with a contract variation. So, you know, without a doubt, this person has failed in his or her job, what we asked them to do. But I will also echo what Councillor Allen said in terms of lessons learned, and I do appreciate, as he did, the frankness from our Director of Place and our Borough Solicitor. it is welcome, that level of frankness and openness about what's gone on, and I think we all appreciate lessons learned. I do have a couple of questions. One of the lessons learned is that I'm not sure was on the, but forgive me, directive, it was on the how we prevent contract managers to carte blanche spend public money without doing the proper checks, and maybe it may be there on a strengthened system. My main question, and it's not been spoken about tonight, and that is the role of contractor A. So my understanding of this is contractor A is brought in on behalf of the council, as the slides say, to carry out preliminary works and investigation works. We pay contractor A to do that job, and contractor A, no idea who they are. They're supposed to actually give us a very good estimate of what the works would cost, which we then contract contractor B to do it. That is my understanding of contractor A's job, to do that. So it seems to me that there's also been a huge failing in the role of contractor A in all of this. The second question, or the third question, is I understood the reason that we were given. I followed the reason we were given for the contract going from, first of all, 395,000 to 443,000, then to 513,000. We were told additional works, especially propping, were identified on site. How anybody didn't know that the gable end of Diamonds would need substantial propping is beyond me. But that's by the by. I didn't quite follow what the reasons were for it then going from 513 to 895, even though we settled at 100k lower than that. So I would appreciate answers to that, to those questions, Chair. Thank you. And I probably just want a quick comeback.
Thank you, Councillor Beale, and we'll go back over to our Director, Jerry Brough.
Chair, thank you, Chair. I'll try to answer that question, but I might have to ask Rob Holt to come in on this, because Robertsons have done quite a detailed investigation of the various costs. As Rob indicated, we were also thinking around collusion and was that an issue, and so to rule that out effectively, I think Robertsons did a lot of work on the detail. As I understand it, when you're propping the road or propping the riverbank, you could put in one prop, you could put in 3 props, you could put in a particular type of prop that costs X pound, or you could put in a different type of prop that costs 2 times X pounds. So it was all to do with the various propping and undermining and prevention of the river. I mean, during winter, remember, so additional propping was needed because of the higher level of the river during the winter period. So they were legitimate additional costs, and the purpose of these additional costs seemed to be legitimate. What we didn't get a grasp of is with the sheer quantity and cost associated with all of this additional work, because the project manager either played down the additional rising costs and didn't report them back to anyone in the council. So that's the explanation as to why the cost was more and why we weren't aware. That is, I or my team weren't aware of it. Maybe Rob, you want to just say about that, and you might also want to say what action we took subsequent to finding this situation, and particularly in relation to the project manager. I think that'd be council would be interested to know what we did to address that issue with the project manager.
Thank you, Jerry. First of all, Councillor Peel, you're correct. I think the role of contractor A would have been about setting the scope, if you like, of the work. And I think the problem was, as was in the slides earlier on, because of health and safety reasons, nobody actually accessed the site. So the majority of the additional works were around the propping and the significant quantity of propping that was needed along the way. Now, because nobody accessed the site, and until the actual contractor B got onto site to start to do the work, they wouldn't have known. And until you actually, you know, I'm not a demolition expert myself, but until they actually started doing the work and the demolition itself, that's at that point in time they realised that they probably needed additional propping. So we've done an analysis of all the costs that have taken place, and as I say, it's the costs are higher than the original budget were, but probably the council's actually had the value. The problem is that as these costs were not coming in by the project manager on site, he was not letting anyone within the council be made aware of it until it was too late. So we've reviewed all that, and the fact we've also sat down with contractor B, because at the end of the day, as you would suspect, we had questions around contractor B and should we be continuing to use them, but actually they're a very reputable contractor. Now what we've actually done since then is the fact that clearly there's plenty of people available in Robertson to support any of our colleagues, and there was plenty of people within the council able to support. What should have happened is, even if they thought it was a problem, they should have stuck their hand up and asked for help, and they didn't. And unfortunately, as a result of that, we had to dismiss the project manager because of the performance on this particular contract. It's unfortunate, but the facts are that there was plenty of support. There's plenty of people who could have helped, and it was one, poor contract administration, and I suppose an absolute lack of communication back into Robertson itself and back into the council.
Just to come back on that, Chair. Thanks for that additional information, Rob. You may or may not be in a position to answer this question based upon the legal advice from Vera Solicitor. Is contractor A Robertson's? No. Okay.
No.
All right. Sorry. Okay. It still begs the question, doesn't it? What did we pay contractor A? Because that's not on the presentation. So I presume we paid them something. They go on site, do the preliminary work and preliminary investigations, give us some idea of the cost, and then when the actual people go on, the demolition experts go on, whatever preliminary work and investigation work contractor A has done, you may as well just rip up and throw in the bin. Why did we pay them? We would have been better off just paying contractor B to go on site and just tell us what needed doing. The whole point of having the first contractor there is to assist the council so that the council doesn't go into this blindfolded. And that, again, I appreciate we've been told there's a contract administration failure throughout this, which has to rest with corporate property and Robertson's. And it's not about finger pointing, it's about lessons learned. But there also seems to be a failure with us when we didn't protect ourselves adequately right at the beginning of this process. And I think just on that issue, in terms of contractor A, there do remain some unanswered questions on this. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Peel. Do you just want to come back on that, Director?
Sure, Chair. Apologies, I put my camera off there accidentally. I think Councillor Peel has a valid point. Clearly, the whole reason, as Councillor Peel says, for appointing somebody to do preliminary investigation work is for them to do preliminary investigation work and to specify the contract. In this particular case, I think everyone concerned has got no doubt that they should have come back and said this should not be tendered as a single contract. This should be tendered in two stages. One stage to find out the exact nature and extent of the work and to define the scope more clearly before then going on to contract for the main work. I think, again, Rob is maybe able to help me on this, but that's my understanding of where we went wrong in this particular case. It should have been a two-stage contract. We should not have had to find out about these variations as we went along. We should have stopped the contract once we knew the preliminary investigation and then retendered on the basis of the work that we knew was needing to be done. Rob, do you want to add anything to that?
Thank you, Jerry. Yeah, that is exactly what should have happened. And just to add some points for completeness, as we're still investigating this process and supporting Bolton and the borough solicitor, we're actually looking at the whole tender process that around contractor A and what was actually settled, and how we got into that position, and what was procured and what was the contractor asked to produce as part of the documentation. So that review is actually still ongoing now, so we have an absolute clear picture right from the very start of the project as part of this lessons learned of exactly who did what and when and what contracts were used and what the specification and scope of works were originally. and that's just not only to help Robertson, but also to help the council going forward, and make sure that we do have the right processes, because as rightly been pointed out right from the outset, that's the problem. If nobody went on site, they could have never seen the works, the quantity of works. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Rob. We'll now go over to Councillor McKeon, please.
Thanks, Chair. An awful lot's been said, and I think we've learned an awful lot, which has been very, very valuable. I just wanted again specifically to ask about contractor A, and ask the question: how hindered were they in their work by this health and safety guidance? When I saw that in the presentation, frankly I couldn't believe it. I'm afraid I was tempted to think to myself, this is genuinely health and safety gone mad. How could the scope of the contract be properly assessed if they couldn't get on the site? So I'd like someone to say a little bit more about the guidance on health and safety. Where did it come from? And was no attempt to mitigate whatever problems were foreseen? The other question I'd like to ask of Rob, the project manager obviously is crucial in all this. I wonder what kind of experience did he or she have? And within Robertson's, is there any procedure for supervising people who are in such a role with such a very, very big contract? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McKeon. So we'll go back over to Rob and Jerry, please, to answer Councillor McKeon's questions.
Rob first, do you want to go?
Yeah. First of all, Jerry, would you mind if I answer the health and safety question as well as from my understanding? Yeah. So we're at this part of the original, or part of our process that we're trying to support the council with is that original specification to really find out why nobody could get onto the site under health and safety. Now there's a lot of hearsay, shall we say, about what that is. We're trying to get to the facts, so we're trying to understand what documents went out to subcontractor B for them to price and for them to look at, and we're also trying to find out what kind of discussions were taking place between subcontractor A and subcontractor B before it came over to Robertson, and that's quite a significant piece of work for which we've only just recently received a number of documents from the borough solicitor that we've had a look at, and we've got a number of other documents that we'd like to get hold of so that we can try and understand actually what's taken place, and potentially is there a route to recovery for some of this. So that's the point around health and safety. Around project managers and this particular project manager, we had done quite a lot of work with this project manager before. He was actually brought over to Bolton from our main construction division in the northwest. So we knew his CV, we knew he'd done a lot of work of a similar nature. Bearing in mind, we also knew that he had the support of contract administration within Robertson to turn to if he needed any help and guidance. And just as an ongoing process, we do have almost like a passport to work. So if you're on a particular project, whether it's a construction manager, site manager, or an engineer, we like to make sure that people have the right qualifications to do that job, and we were confident that the project manager had. And it was as much a surprise to us to find out the situation on Bank Street as it was to Bolton Council as well. Thank you, Chair.
Chair, if I could just add to that.
Absolutely, Jerry, please.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I mean, just so everyone is clear, the reason that Robertsons are taking such an interest in helping us get to the bottom of all of this is because there's an additional 261,000 that we have paid out as part of the settlement, and we are still in discussion with Robertsons as to whether or not that's something that the council has to meet in its entirety, or whether that's a shared responsibility between the council and Robertsons. So clearly, in order to get to an understanding of how that should be shared, we both need to understand that everything that went on with this contract, and where, and that includes the role of contractor A, again, who are a reputable company and who would expect might want to work with the council and with Robertsons again. So it's not as if we're without any leverage in this, but it just takes time, and we've not got to that point where we can come back to members and say, of that extra 261,000, how much is the council going to have to bear, and how much is going to be shared by our partners? But that's something that we're working on. I hope you don't mind me saying that, Rob, but that's I don't think is something that we want to keep from members.
No, that's absolutely fine, Jerry, and it's agreed. We realise that we have a role in this, and we'll work with the council to reach an agreement around it. And that's, as Jerry rightly says, that's why we're also looking at the whole, how the whole process transpired from start to finish.
Thank you again to both of you. We'll now go over to Councillor Julie Pattison. Councillor Pattison, please. Councillor Pattison, are you with us?
I am here, Chair. I'm waiting for it to go red. If it is showing, it's not on my screen, so I do apologise.
We can certainly hear you if you wish to ask your question or wish to make comments.
It's more than a comment, Chair.
Okay.
I have taken on board a lot of what has been said by the previous speakers, and I do agree, with some of it, like contract law being complex. However, we're a local authority. We are not a small business. We should be above these kind of issues now. I can't agree with lessons need to be learned. It's not acceptable. It seems to have become an accepted standard for sloppy mistakes. How this has happened, I really cannot understand. I can't understand why robust management was not put in place right from the very start, which has already been mentioned previously. A clear tick list. Delegated authority should not compromise due diligence. We're not talking about a small community project here. We're talking about a huge project. And I'm sorry, but to me, due diligence, again, delegating authority, Jerry, you have to take some responsibility of that yourself. A lot has been put on a project manager, poor project management. But before that, things should have been checked to make sure this project manager was actually suitable for the role, as big as what he was taking on, and he obviously wasn't. 1 is a mistake, but 16 is downright negligence. And it's a huge mistake, a costly mistake out of the public purse for us to be learning from. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Pattison. Would you like to come back and say anything on what Councillor Pattison said, Director? You are on mute, Director.
Apologies, Chair. I don't seek to absolve myself from responsibility on this issue, clearly. And in fact, the fact that I intervened on one of the variations and negotiated that down indicates that I did take as close an interest in this project as I would have been expected to, I believe. I think the one what we have to remember is in 2017, you know, when this contract started, and really for the early part of my time with the council during mid to late 2018, we had a CPS, a corporate property services, that we had major issues with. That's well known. It's well known throughout the council, and that's why we turned to Robertson's, and that's why we wanted to source in external expertise through the Clear Sustainable Futures contract. If I recall, during that period, 2018 into early 2019, in fact, we were still trying to get that agreement through the council so that we could bring in additional external assistance to help sort out some of the issues that we had in our corporate property services. So this was something that we were, I would suggest at the time this contract was put together, we did have some major deficiencies in our corporate property team, and indeed it wasn't until November 2019 that Robertson's actually took over the project management of it. Until that time, it was managed by council officers in our corporate property services team. So in terms of contract, you know, contractor A specifying the scoping the work, you know, kicking off the project, and the initial variations, I think these are down to the council and to the members of the council team, and I'm part of that team, so I'm not absolving myself from that responsibility. I think once the project management came on in 2019, then we potentially relaxed on the basis that we thought we had a professional project manager with the supervision and the support of Robertson's group behind them. And it is unfortunate that we have been badly let down by that, in my view, by that project manager. And I accept the fact it's quite a large contract, but in the scope of our capital works programme, which exceeds, you know, I think last year exceeds £45 million, it is not physically possible for me to be over the top of every single project. So I do rely on my staff, I do rely on professionals within the team to do their job properly. And in this case, I do feel it's reasonable for me to claim that I was let down by that team. But I don't absolve myself entirely from that responsibility. And indeed, the responsibility for me is to make sure it doesn't happen again and to put this right. And I think that we've been trying to do that with the introduction of Robertson's and the Clear Sustainable Futures contract. I think we've put in place the SAMP, the Strategic Asset Management Programme. I think we've got much more better gateways and management processes under people like Damien Cross in the department now. So I do think over the last year and a half, I have been trying to make these changes to the department. Indeed, if you're at Scrutiny on Wednesday, you'll see just the extent of the work that's been going on to make these things you know, better and more efficient. It is unfortunate in the extreme, as you say, that we had this particularly bad experience with this one contract. I haven't gone back beyond 2017 to look at previous contracts, you know, but it doesn't change the fact that this was a badly managed contract, and we have to take some responsibility for that. So I do agree with Councillor Patterson to some extent.
Okay,
thank you for that, Jerry. Sorry, Chair. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Pattison, and thank you, Jerry. We're going to go over to Councillor Marie Brady now, please. Councillor Brady.
Thank you, Chair. For it to go red. Well, I'll start speaking anyway. Okay, well, I think everybody knows demolition is a risky business, but especially when you've got different contractors employed at different stages, as we have here. And I think one of the comments I would make is it's pretty standard on site for variations to be made verbally, but they must be confirmed in writing. That's known by everybody on site, so I find that very hard to believe that this project manager didn't confirm them in writing. And that leads me to the conclusion he was either incompetent or unqualified. So again, the question that leads me to, was this PM, this project manager, directly employed by Robertson's, or was he agency? And whichever way, what about public indemnity insurance? Because surely that provision being provided to the council by Robertson's, that they have to give professional indemnity. They were employed to do that. They obviously failed to discharge that. And can you just clarify, this is from Robertson's, that they think that the costs were acceptable with respect to the works that were carried out? That was the impression I got. I wonder, could you just clarify that as well, please?
Thank you. We'll go back over to Rob, please.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, from the work that we've done so far, we think that the council has actually had the value of the work as what was settled at. Now, that's by going through quite a robust process, because as Jerry rightly pointed out, we recognise our role in this, and there is an ongoing discussion with the council about our contribution back to this. What we need to recognise is that Robertson were not contracted to do this work. We actually took it over as part of the process. As Jerry rightly said, the works had already started, the die had been cast, the scope had been set, and the works were underway. So that's no excuse. I don't mean that to be an excuse, but it's, once there was that many people involved in it, subcontractor A, subcontractor B, and ourselves. Ideally, what you want is a single point of responsibility and accountability, which is now what we've got in place going forward. In terms of the project manager, he was directly employed by Robertson. He had worked on a number of projects successfully for us before, and again, we all assumed that he could undertake the role as contract management effectively. And we also, as I say, we also had plenty of support around him if it was needed on any issue regarding the contract. So what we, as I said, and genuinely, we were as surprised as anybody to find out with less than a fortnight to go before adjudication was going to kick into place that this had taken place. So as a result of that, that's why we're now going through the whole process, every aspect of the contract, every part of the scope, our role in it as well, in terms of what's gone on, to make sure that not just about lessons learned, but to understand, our performance in it, and therefore what our contribution will be back to the council, even though we're not contracted to do so. We just genuinely recognise that we had a role to play in this, in so much that the council did not have the opportunity to challenge the variations.
But you're saying that even if they had had the opportunity to challenge the variations, that the cost attributed now to this additional work that should have been covered by variations is still fair. That work has been carried out, and,
yes.
And the council, although they weren't aware of it at the start, they're actually paying for work that has been done, and it's at rates that are, I don't know whether a schedule of rates with this contract, with the initial contract. But are you kind of saying that that's a fair payment? What we're being asked to pay now is a fair representation of the work that's been done?
In our view, if the project had been administered properly, with the proper variations taking place at the right points in time, the contract sum would have been finalised at around that figure. The fact is, from our point of view, one, from the outset, the proper work wasn't done to set the budget at the right figure in the first place. And secondly, nobody had the chance to challenge it. So even though, in our opinion, the works was around the same price, who's to say that we couldn't have got it more cheaper by challenging along the way? As I say, we're still using contractor B, because one of the things you can imagine, one of the first things that we thought about was, how are we getting value for money here? And do we want to use this contractor on other projects? And we've gone through a process with that particular contractor to make sure that, one, we trust them and they are reputable, and they are, and that they do deliver value for money for the council. And that's a process that's gone alongside in parallel to this, to make sure that you are using the right contractor, and that basically we trust them.
So what was the contract value set on what was discovered by contractor A? Was it the investigations that contractor A carried out? That was then the budget for the project. So that was obviously incorrect anyway, wasn't it? That's what I'm getting.
That's the work that we're doing now, Councillor Brady. We're trying to work out under what contract was contractor A employed.
Yeah.
What were they asked? What was their scope of work? And what contract specification did they give to contractor B?
Yeah. Okay.
And that process has only been underway about 3 weeks, to be perfectly honest. We've got the information was sent over to us by the borough solicitor, and we're now we've got a few supplementary questions that we'd like to ask around that documentation to understand it, and then we'll get ourselves to a position of really understanding what went on right at the outset of the project.
This is pretty common, isn't it, in construction? If you get contractor A either doing a design or a feasibility, and then that contract is awarded to contractor B. Contractor B immediately looks for the holes and thinks, great, that's where I'm going to get my variations in, which obviously don't come into a contract price. They come on at the end. So I think from what you're saying, it seems to me a lot of the risk was that contractor A using contractor A, or using a contractor A, maybe not that particular one, but certainly this two-step process. That's where you've got the possibility for it, isn't it?
I think there's two things. One, having somebody at that time within the council with the right experience to procure this kind of work, and then to be perfectly honest, not to access a site with such a significant amount of shall we say difficulties adjacent to a river and a major highway. Is the starting point of the problem. And what should have happened, probably when there was access to the site, probably the project should have been stopped there and then to give everybody time to really review what actually needed to be done, to come back to the council and ask for a realistic budget.
It just sounds like everybody inherited what's known as a can of worms.
Yeah, unfortunately that's what this one is. I think and I do accept that it's a harsh lesson to learn, but I can reassure you from both the council's point of view and from a Robertson point of view, the right processes are in place. And if you look at some of the work that's now been done on capital projects and the value for money that we're getting and the absolute certainty around the outturn price, which is the important thing set against the budget, it's now being managed effectively.
Okay, well, thank you. I appreciate your frankness as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brady, and thank you, Rob. We're now going to go over to Councillor John Walsh. Councillor John Walsh, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman. Can I first of all say that I think we ought to thank the Borough Solicitor for the frankness of the presentation and Mr. Brough for the manner in which he's responded to it. Clearly, this project has been a long-term aspiration of the council. Church Wharf has been on the go for not quite as long as I've been on the council, but for a long number of years. It was one of you mentioned Councillor Howarth there. It was one of his projects at one stage, so we know long-term aspiration. I think it's clearly going to be a difficult demolition of that property on Bank Street. We understand that variations are not unusual, but the thing that concerns me in all of this is the process by which we end up in a situation of having no period in which we could dispute the claims because there had been a failure to challenge in the appropriate manner. And the question that exercises me at this stage is that if, for example, and I'm not having got the borough solicitor in this one, please don't misunderstand me, if she failed in her duty, she has professional indemnity to cover her work. Does the contractor or the project manager in this case not have such professional liability cover in order to protect the client in the event of malfeasance on the part of the project manager? A simple question. It's a straightforward answer.
Thank you, and we'll go back over to Rob, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we do have professional indemnity for these kind of issues. We haven't actually looked at our insurances as yet, because one of the things, as I rightly I pointed out at the outset, is we weren't ever contracted to do this work, so we actually haven't any contractual responsibility. we do have a responsibility to make sure that our particular individuals and project managers are reporting properly, clearly, and they clearly didn't in this occasion. But as Jerry rightly pointed out before, we're not hiding from our responsibilities. What we're trying to understand is, of any additional costs, what is rightly responsible to Robertson, and what should be elsewhere. And that's the process that we're going through, and we will agree with the council an appropriate position. So we won't be looking to our indemnity, we'll be looking to agree some compensation back to the council once we've done the proper due diligence to understand all the responsibilities along the way and who played what role, and which is why we are reviewing what happened with subcontractor A. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Rob. Do you wish to come in, Director?
Just to add to Rob's comments, yeah, please. Thank you. Yeah, just to add to Rob's comments around responsibility. It would be the case that Robertson would take responsibility for this project now, but at the time, as I recounted to members, we were in the process of basically appointing Robertsons under the Clear Sustainable Futures contract, and clearly they were not going to assume responsibility for projects that they had not initiated, started, and understood fully the scope of. So this is why this, in this particular case, as Rob says, they don't have a contractual responsibility. It's because this was something that they agreed to lend us support to, having after they were given the contract through Clear Sustainable Futures. Moving forward, that would not be the case, and we would ensure that there is a contractual responsibility with Robertsons under the existing contract. I just wanted to make that clear to members that that is something that would not be the situation going forward. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Director, and we'll bring in now the Deputy Leader of the Council, whose portfolio covers the Bank Street demolition, and that's Councillor Martin Cox. So we'll go over to Councillor Cox, please.
Thank you, Chair, and I would like to thank officers and members who contributed in this meeting. Not dissimilar to Councillor Allen, I've spent most of my life in project management, and particularly in this area of work, so I certainly wasn't going to have the wool pulled over my eyes on this one. Two initial points I want to make. This was a poorly put together contract. The deficiencies within the corporate property services are there to be seen throughout this contract, and the previous administration was quite correct to shut them down and pass on the responsibilities in effect to Robertsons. Unfortunately, this was a poorly administered contract by Robertsons. Rob knows that, and I'll say a few more words about that a little later on. I have done, as I say, I've done a lot of contracts like this, and they are difficult to quantify. The Bank Street contract was not an easy one to put together, and a lot of what you're trying to do is actually hidden, and you don't see it until you've done the demolition, certainly in terms of the propping and the structure. I understand that perfectly. I've done plenty of that, so I'm not trying to pretend that was necessarily an easy thing to do. Overspends are frequent, and 16 variations is not particularly exceptional in this case. I get very frustrated, Chair, when we simply say lessons have been learned or lessons need to be learned. This is a demolition and structures contract. Bolton Council have been doing this for many years. There's not too many lessons that need to be learned on this. We need to put the contracts together properly, and we need to administer them properly, neither of which happened in this case. There is no evidence, Chair, of criminality, and if there was, I would be recommending without hesitation to prosecute. if we found an individual, I would expect this council to prosecute them. There should be we should be absolutely clear on that. No ambiguity there at all. In short, Chair, the project management of this contract was little short of abysmal. Rob knows that. He's been pretty frank with members tonight and in admitting that. And we will see some compensation from Robertson's. It's already been hinted at in the course of the meeting. And I would like to have come to this meeting to say what that figure was, but we will report back as to what that figure was, because Robertson's do hold some responsibility in that. In terms of the mistakes putting the contract together in the first place by our own CPS, we can't do much about that, Chair. We can't sue ourselves for this money. We were responsible for putting that together. So those are my main thoughts. I think there's quite a lot of experienced people on this committee who can read between the lines to see what's gone on here. Councillor Allen and Councillor Brady in particular have experience in this field, and I do feel the committee has shown a level of maturity in some of the questions. I was satisfied that even though the project has gone significantly over what was originally budgeted, we have had the value of the work, which should offer some hope to the council, to the councillors here, that not all the money all the extra money was wasted. But there's no hiding from it, Chair. It was a poorly put together contract, poorly administered. It's a job of the scrutiny to highlight that. I think they've done that job tonight, and we will report back further when we've concluded our negotiations with Robertson's in terms of what amount of compensation that we can seek, and that should put an end to this, and we should be able to provide the scrutiny committee with a final cost for the project, which should be lower than the one that's currently advertised. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Cox, for that. And could I thank all members who have asked questions, and to the officers this evening for replying, and for the report which was presented to us this evening. It was myself who asked for this report to come to the Scrutiny Committee, and Councillor Zaman also asked for this report as well. So I'm satisfied that officers have been as open and transparent as possible. They have been throughout the presentation with all of the questions and the answers which they have given. And thank you, Councillor Cox, for your contribution at the end. And yes, please bring those figures back to the Scrutiny Committee when you have them, with the compensation from Robertson's. That would be very much appreciated. So with that item, the committee was augmented by members from the Place Scrutiny Committee. Members of the Place Scrutiny are welcome to stay for the rest of the agenda. If you wish to do, then please do. But we'll carry on with the agenda, and we'll now go to item 6, which is the proposed committee work programme. This is a standing item on the agenda. We're actually at the last Scrutiny Committee meeting of the municipal year, but we'll go over to Vicky for this item. It's a standing item anyway.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, it is a standing item, and it just outlines the work now that has been undertaken by the Scrutiny Committee during 2020-21, and we'll be doing a new work programme in hopefully June, when the first round of Scrutiny Committees are held again. Thank you.
Thank you, Vicky. I don't know if any members have just any questions. I have to ask if any members have any questions on the work programme. If you have, just unmute your microphones. I think everybody's fine with the work programme. As I say, we're at the end of the municipal year now. So we go over to item 7, which is another standing item on this agenda, which is going to be taken by our Borough Treasurer Sue Johnson, and it's our COVID-19 and finances update. So we'll go over to our Borough Treasurer Sue Johnson, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. So a brief update for myself. The slides that I will present this evening are taken from our return to MHCLG, and that's our figures as at the end of February. So in total, we have received £26.7 million worth of emergency government support, and our estimates at the full year effect of costs, loss of income, impact of delay in achieving savings estimated at 27.3 million. Could I have the next slide, please, John? So a brief look at the additional costs that we have incurred. Adults and children's social care is just under £1 million, but of course they are spending a lot more than that, but that has been funded by other sources of funding, for example, funding that sits as part of the NHS in the CCG, and also money that's provided by specific grants that we have been receiving. The work that Public Health have been doing has been entirely funded by the value of the grants that you can see there. Other residual costs across the council, I think of note there is obviously within ICT, because there's been a need to equip council members and officers with the ability to work in a much more flexible and remote way than we've ever done in the past. Obviously a little bit around homelessness, mortuary costs, of course, and being prepared if additional capacity was needed. And because of some of the delays in getting the savings out, there's been an impact on the cash flow pot. We're currently estimating about 3.8 million. Next slide, please, John. So in terms of the income losses, this is probably more significant for us, as we saw and we discussed quite a lot as part of the budget process recently. So commercial income, most notably the loss of the airport dividend, but also an impact on some of our traded services. We of course have had a loss of business rates and also council tax income, and then miscellaneous sales fees charges across the council areas. We have received just under £2 million worth of government support to help mitigate that impact. We're currently estimating that the impact will cause us to use around about £4.5 million worth of reserves, and of course, as you've heard me say many times, the impact of the business rates and council tax, whilst it's a loss of cash collection, it doesn't impact on our revenue budget outturn for the financial year recently ended. It falls into the following financial years. And the final slide, please, John. So as you can see off that slide, a snapshot of the additional funding that has come through, a significant amount of money which has flowed through the council but then out to businesses and residents to be able to support as best as possible the borough during the pandemic, covering a wide range of support, not only to businesses but also residents, but also then how we can improve and support in terms of public health work, reopening the high street, and essentially also the communication, so every single resident gets the opportunity to understand what is happening, where the support is. And now we are moving into the importance, obviously, of the vaccination programmes. So I'll leave it there, Chair, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Borough Treasurer, and we're going to go over to Councillor Peel, who wishes to ask a question. Councillor Peel.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, undoubtedly, you know, I'm on record of saying this in numerous arenas. The governments have provided vast sums of financial support to see the population and all swathes of the economy through this unprecedented pandemic. It's also true to say they've wasted vast amounts of money, particularly on track and trace and other failed projects. But the reason I indicated was, and the Borough Treasurer will never agree with me on this, I accept that because there is a line in the budget that if we go back to February when we discussed this, and COVID related costs on the budget were estimated at that time at around 9 million. And I made the point that that isn't true. We cut 37 million from the budget last February, and if that argument was true, people would seriously be saying we'd be cutting 28 million. Nobody thinks that is true. So the COVID costs were not 9 million because that actually ignores the fact that we used 5 million worth of reserves to balance this year's budget. So, sorry, the financial year just gone, that budget due to COVID costs. And it also ignored the fact that there were 8 million of deferred cuts, which all parties supported from 1921, which we had planned on the advice of the Borough Treasurer to be partly or mainly offset by the time we got to this stage by natural and planned growth in business rates. So we actually do come to the conclusion that the total COVID related costs were around the figure. We'll never know the true figure, but around the figure of around 18 million, not 9 million. Now, I don't expect the Borough Treasurer, who I have a great deal of respect for, to necessarily meet me completely in agreement on those, but I think it is beyond a doubt that COVID related costs are far, far greater than 9 million. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Peel. Nobody else has indicated. I don't know if you want to come back, Borough Treasurer. The camera's still on you.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? I think that Councillor Peel and I agree to disagree on that. You've probably got an accountant's version of the budget and a member's version of the budget. I think that obviously what I think Councillor Peel is alluding to is that we've been denied the opportunity to use the value of reserves in an alternative way because we've had to apply them to support the budget due to COVID, and had we had more reserves available, we may have had the opportunity to do something different as part of the budget process. But we are where we are, the budget's approved, and now, you know, we've obviously got the difficult task of achieving the savings, but also monitoring the ongoing impact of COVID over future years, and if there is a detrimental impact, how we deal with that. So a lot of work, you know, to do in the future. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Borough Treasurer, and we'll move on with the agenda because nobody else has indicated to speak. So we'll go to agenda item number 8, which is a presentation on neighbourhood management. And to take us through this presentation are our officers Emily Brooke and Raphael Martinez. So can we go over to Emily and Raf, please?
It'll be me, thanks. Thank you, Chair. Unfortunately, Raf's IT is not being helpful this evening.
Okay, thank you. We'll go over to yourself, Emily. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, everybody. So it's a pleasure this evening to be talking to you about some of the background of neighbourhood management work in Bolton, and we've also asked to talk about narrowing the gap, targeted funding, and to include statistics. So with that in mind, John, would you mind moving on to the next slide? Thanks, John. So we're starting this evening by looking at how we measure deprivation, and I think we all understand that deprivation is a hugely complex area to try and understand in terms of cause and effect. But one of the better measurements that we use, and one of the kind of nationally recognised official measures for looking at this in England, is the index of multiple deprivation. So this looks at deprivation across local authority areas and across smaller areas as well. And the IMD ranks every small area in England from 1 in terms of the most deprived to 32,844 in terms of the least deprived area. those small areas, and I'll have to I tripped over this earlier, but those small areas, the LSOAs, are lower layer super output areas, and they're designed to be of similar population sizes across the country, with an average of 1,500 residents in each. So they are a standard way of dividing up the country for measurement in England. Next slide, please, John. This slide just goes into a little bit more detail about understanding what's behind that, the indices that we're looking at here. So the index is made up of these 7 domains that you can see on the left-hand side of the slide, and you'll also see that they are weighted in terms of the value that's applied to them when they're looking to scale them up to measure deprivation within an area, with income and employment being rated the highest. And those weightings are derived from academic literature, so they're research-based, which looks at poverty, deprivation, and there are also, in case anyone's particularly interested in these statistics, some supplementary indices which are concerned with income deprivation among children and older people, which are available online. Next slide, please, John. Thank you. This slide just goes a little bit deeper into what the IMD can and also can't or shouldn't be used for. So for your information, it's very, very useful for comparing small areas across England, or for looking across local authority areas and looking at those kind of larger areas. It's good for identifying the most deprived small areas, and for understanding those different domains or types of deprivation. And as I said before, it can be used to look across local authority areas, so make a comparison. What it's not so useful for is looking backwards. There are 2 reasons for that. One, the methodology, as with lots of kind of academic research-based ways of measuring things, changes over time as we learn more. And also, this is a kind of a comparative rather than an absolute index. So whilst rankings may change, it doesn't mean that your position has actually changed. It can just be that different measures are changing around you. There's significant amounts of information available about the indices of multiple deprivation online, if anybody would like to look into it more, including some really good guidance. And also, I just wanted to take the opportunity to point members and anybody else who's listening this evening to our Joint Strategic Needs Assessment website, which is the hyperlink for it is on the bottom of the slide there. That has much more information, which you would not want me to talk through in its entirety in the Scrutiny Committee, because we'd be here for a very long time, but it gives a really, really decent kind of look at the information that we hold about our population and our place in Bolton, and about some of those wider determinants of health and those socio-economic factors that we know affect people's lives in Bolton. So it's a really good one source of more statistics, should you want them, that our colleagues in public health have worked extremely hard to pull together during the pandemic as well, when they've obviously been overseeing the COVID-19 response. Next slide, please, John. Okay, so these statistics about Bolton speak to the 2019 iteration of the IMD, which was the most recent version of the index that was published. We don't have a future publishment due date, a future date for publishing yet, but these are normally produced every 3 to 4 years, so we can expect one in the coming couple of years. So these stats were pre-pandemic, but at that point Bolton was ranked as the 34th most deprived local authority area in the country of 337. Within Greater Manchester, Bolton was about average for the combined authority area. Generally, Bolton ranks less well for income, employment and crime, but the authority ranks notably better for barriers to houses and services. The rank of health deprivation and disability is also given there, which currently stands at 50. And of Bolton's LSOAs, those smaller areas, 42 of those areas, or 23.7%, rank within the 10% most deprived areas in the country, in England as opposed to the UK. And it is of note that over time there have been very few changes regarding our most deprived neighbourhoods, and deprivation remains at its greatest in those wards that are listed there. So we can't say with evidential confidence the efforts to tackle deprivation sustainably in the past have made a significant difference to those areas which are most deprived and have been in previous indices. Next slide, please, John. And this slide just gives you a visual representation of some of the data that I've just talked through, so you can see the distribution of the areas which are more deprived within the borough, with those being shown in the brighter orange and red colours. Next slide, please, John. Okay, so we're now going to look into a little bit of the background of the neighbourhood management programme. And this programme came out of regeneration programmes in the kind of post-millennium, early 2000s period. So programmes like the single regeneration budget and the national neighbourhood renewal strategy. And initially in Bolton, 11 areas were particularly targeted, and that was based on that IMD data that we've just been looking at and its position at the time. And we had a joint approach with Bolton at Home at that time as well. So the funding was allocated on a formula of relative deprivation. And officers worked with ward members to identify activities and projects with the idea that those would help to improve outcomes, to narrow the gap, and to tackle issues of deprivation and support the most vulnerable. And what we were looking to do at that time was to develop capacity within communities and to champion pilots with a view to those becoming sustainable if successful. So I think one example of that was the Farnworth Men in Sheds project originally received seed funding through the neighbourhood management budget, but later went on to not need that funding anymore. And we were very much at that time as well looking to improve and influence connectivity between local need and mainstream services. And those activities at that point were identified and delivered under the themes of clean and green, safe, children and young people, stronger, health and well-being, and prosperous, which you all recognise as being quite closely aligned to the 6 outcomes which sit underneath the Bolton 2030 vision. Next slide, please, John. And I won't go through all of these in detail this evening, but I will pause here for a moment so you've got an opportunity to look through those. These are some high-level examples of some activity that was funded or delivered over that time period. Next slide, please, John. So, as members will be aware, we're currently undergoing a review of area working in neighbourhood management, which we're being supported by the Local Government Association on, and I'll touch on that a little bit in a minute. But I just wanted to touch first on the drivers for change and why we're looking at a review at this point in time. So one of those is around budgets. So the neighbourhood management budget, since that kind of early 2000s period, has reduced from being quite a significant pot of money at over 2 million to just 300,000. With neighbourhood management and area working aligning under the same service. Now, £300,000 is still a significant amount of money, but when you break that down to £15,000 per ward, it's not a huge amount of money if you're looking at affecting change to kind of systemic, multi-generation, deep-rooted deprivation. So the current model alone, a view's been taken that it cannot drive that systemic level of change that we're looking for. There is also an opportunity to review our approach, to refocus, to prioritise our outcomes with the Vision 2030, and to also take account of wider public sector reform in Bolton. So to look at opportunities for good practice from elsewhere, to learn more about how our approach has worked in the past, and to look at how your area working model fits into other kind of catalysts for change in the borough. For example, the neighbourhood lens through which we're delivering some of our services going forward. And also, whilst COVID-19 has been a complete tragedy for the borough in many ways, the COVID-19 response itself, I think we've learned a lot as a system going through the past year. Of course, I wasn't here for all of that, but I think I've certainly seen the agility and the flexibility and the collaboration across that system in the course of the last 6 months that I've been here, and that provides important opportunities for our Bolton family going forward. We know that we cannot solve some of the problems that we have going forward without working with our residents in very different ways and with engaging our communities in very different ways. So that's a huge consideration in the review work that we're doing at the moment. Next slide, please, John. So in terms of the Local Government Association-led review itself, just to give you an idea of the structure of that, all members will have heard about this at some point a couple of months ago, because you've received an email. I think it was from me. If it wasn't, it was from somebody in my team, but I think you received an email from me inviting you to complete a survey where we were really seeking to listen to you on your views about the current model for area working. So the area forums and the budgets associated with them, and we were looking at the strengths and weaknesses of that model, and then we were seeking your views on what we could do differently in future as well. The outputs of that survey very much helped to set us up to go forward into a cross-party working group. So that was set up to include 16 Bolton members. We also had a strategic advisor facilitating the sessions from the Local Government Association and 2 Local Government Association political peers who were all working together with the aim of achieving political consensus on the key principles that would underpin a future model. And certainly, having been a part of those sessions in some form, I absolutely want to thank the members that were involved again, because I found it a really, really positive exercise to go through, and it was actually a really nice example to me for that way of working and experiencing it for the first time in Bolton. And the ground covered across those 3 sessions included community and place leadership and the role of councillors in a modern local governments. We were looking at what members wanted to be doing kind of less and more of, and some of the shifts that you saw within your roles. We're looking very much at community engagement, which I'll come on to more when we talk about the principles on the next page. And we're also looking at growing our community contribution and looking at the strengths and the role of our communities in Bolton, and very much looking at delivering to local needs. So we're looking very much at how this model, as I say, fits alongside how we deliver services. Next slide, please, John. And whilst we've completed the sessions for that review, and I'll come on to next steps in a minute, what I did want to do tonight was just give the wide group of members that we've got attending this evening a little bit of a look at some of the design principles which that group has produced together through the course of those 3 sessions. And these will act as tests for any future model which might be approved going forward. So this is very much the kind of spirit of what we're trying to achieve here. So principle number 1, I'll go through these quickly. It's about engaging and empowering communities, and particularly there we're looking for 2-way purposeful communication. So we're not looking to just ask people for their views all the time, although that's wonderful. We're looking to respond in a you said we did way. We're looking to look at lived experience and deep listening and really build trust and a good positive working relationship with our residents and communities. We're looking at resourcing communities and how we do that sustainably, and looking at things like how we help to support mutual aid and non-traditional volunteering, which has been hugely beneficial in communities within the borough through COVID-19 in terms of people supporting each other. So we'd like to support that going forward. We're looking at a culture of collaboration. So we're looking to incentivise and sustain positive relationships across services, across communities and between the 2. We're looking at reducing inequality, so that'll be no surprise, bearing in mind the first part of this presentation tonight, but we're looking to acknowledge and to reduce the social, economic and health inequalities that we know we have between Bolton and other areas, but also within those small areas within Bolton itself, across the borough. We're looking at preventative models, so we're looking at a model which doesn't wait to respond until somebody is at crisis point, but which helps our system across the piece to anticipate and respond to people who are experiencing challenges for the first time, or who need our support early on. We're looking at an intelligence-driven model, so and we're not just meaning data by that. We're really bringing together community insights, human stories, and lived experience along with our data to help take an evidence-based approach to our planning and use of resources. We're We're looking at a strength-based model, which very much builds on the strengths and the passions of not just communities but individuals. And we're looking at a model that is stable and sustainable, so one that can take us forward and we can sustain and evolve over the long term for the Bolton family. And as I'll paraphrase one of our peers here who said, it also needs to be a model that that can survive when we all fall out with each other from time to time. And with that, Joanna, could you take us on to the next slide? So this is just the next steps. So we're currently awaiting, having held those 3 sessions, we're awaiting the LGA's recommendations to the administration, and when those are received, they will go through the normal democratic processes. In the meantime, we're really asking our group leaders to share details within their political groups and to help us communicate to a wider range of members about the work that's been happening and their experiences of being part of it. Subject to approval of the recommendations, we'll be developing a revised model for area working, and we'll be seeking formal approval at a later date for implementation of that model. And we are currently planning for that to be a phased approach to implementation. So this won't be a big bang, completely changed way of working on day one. This will be looking over a 6-month, 1 year, 2 year period of development, maturity and evolution in terms of how we do this in Bolton, during which we will continue to learn and we will continue to seek feedback from members on how this is working. And it's important to say at this point as well that whilst I appreciate that the working group had 16 members who are directly part of it, all members originally took part in that survey, but we really want to engage all members going forward. So at a point where we have more to share, we will be setting up all member briefings. Your role as members will be completely crucial in terms of how successful this is going forward. So we'll be asking for your support and also your agency in helping us to make this model a success should it be implemented, approved and implemented. Anyway, John, I think that's the end of my slides. I can see a few hands going up, so I'll hand back to you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Emily. And the first to speak is Councillor Muslin, who is the Executive Cabinet Member over this area of the Council. So we'll go over to Councillor Muslin, please.
Thank you, Chair. I really just wanted to come in just and quickly say thank you to Emily and to Raf for putting this presentation together. Thought it was obviously important that the information that was presented tonight was pretty clear and simple for members to view, because whilst this can be generally there's lots of many indices and little complicated bits to it, I think it's important to recognise that what we're going through at the moment, this LGA review, is going to be crucial as to how the things look in the future. And so we can spend a lot of time tonight debating what the current system is, or what it has been over the past few years. But really, we're at a point at the moment where one may argue this is a bit premature to have this on the agenda, because we're going through the period of transition and change now, where we're going to be improving this. And I think it's been really good to have the LGA come in and have a survey that's been done by a considerable amount of members, but also have 16 members, as Emily mentioned, participate in the sessions. I was fortunate enough to be involved in those sessions myself, and I have to say the participation from all members in those sessions was great. And when we spoke as a whole group, but went off into our little breakout rooms as well, the participation was fantastic, and we had so many different ideas. But what I think really came through those sessions was the fact that regardless of political party, people were just members were really committed to making sure that we were tackling the issues that matter to Bolton, and actually putting party politics aside to come up with a solution that going forward we can all have buy-in. with, and I think that's really crucial because, you know, for so many councillors who are new to the council, they've been thrown into this and the current way of working, and it's all new to them, whereas we've really got buy-in now from members under the sort of discussions that we've had through the LGA review. And as Emily mentioned, you know, we'll get briefings out further down the line to actually have a look and speak and give more members a bit more of an overview of how things are looking. But I just wanted to say that, you know, we are in this transition stage at the moment, so you know, bear with us as well as an authority whilst we try and go through this. But I'm really grateful for the Emily and Raf's time to put this presentation together, and also my own thanks again to members that participated in the LGA review to hopefully give us a system that going forward will really make a difference to the lives and the people of Bolton. And if there's any other comments or questions later, I'm happy to take those too. But thank you.
Yes, please do stay, because we're going to go over to Councillor Madeline Murray, and we have some questions both from her, and after that we'll go to Councillor Peel. So first of all, Councillor Murray, please.
Thank you, Chair. It's a comment more than a question. I'm not averse to reviews. I think it's a healthier way of working. But I have taken offence a little bit on your slide that's Bolton ranks on the MID 2019 with them, and the bottom bit is all the wards that are under this deprivation at IMD, and we shouldn't be proud of the fact that we're the 34th out of 300 and odd. I think that's appalling, but I think in a lot of ways I'm worried that people miss the point about deprivation, is that originally neighbourhood working was supposed to be either a one or even a two generation plan. It would never happen straight away because you have to start from the very beginning with parents, not just parents, with children, and they have to have aspirations. And I think aspirations and enrichment was the most important part of neighbourhood working. And to say that it hasn't worked, which is actually what you did say, it wasn't working, when we've had budgets court, Sure Start taken out, which was one of the foundations to make improvements, was Sure Start. So it's virtually gone, Sure Start. And I just feel that in a way we're being got at because we're trying to represent our communities in our wards to do the right thing for them, and it doesn't seem to click with some people. I just feel I have to say that. Thank you, Chair.
I'm happy to briefly respond to that, Chair, if that's helpful.
Yes, please do, and thank you to Councillor Murray as well. So we'll go back to Emily, thank you.
There we go, I've got the square. Councillor Murray, just to say, I absolutely didn't mean to cause you any offence, so I'm sorry for that. First of all, in terms of our position of the 34th most deprived borough, it was a statement of fact rather than a communication of any kind of pride in that. And in terms of, I think the words that I used were that there is no evidenceable way that we can say that we have made a significant change to take those parts of the borough that were listed out of deprivation. Those have been the same parts of the borough that have been in the kind of same statistical position for quite some time. That doesn't mean that that we have not done some extremely good things within parts of those boroughs. Some of the examples that I've seen of some of this work have been things that I really support in terms of working with communities over time. What we can't evidence that we've done over that time period is to fix deprivation and to transform those boroughs from a statistical sense. But that's an incredibly complex multi-generation task which you alluded to, and which we're well aware of the complexity of when we're looking at this as part of a review.
Okay, thank you, Emily. We'll go over now to Councillor Peel, please. Councillor Peel.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Emily for a really, really good presentation. I'm very conscious that I think Councillor Muslim alluded to this as well. There's been a vast turnover of new members in the last few years, and for some of the members on this committee, that's the first they knew about the background and the aims of neighbourhood management. So it was a really useful presentation. I think we should, I wasn't aware, by the way, that Bolton was right up at the top, 285th out of 317 authorities. In other words, one of the best in terms of barriers to housing and local services. I think that's an amazing achievement, and I think that is it's one of the indices of deprivation that is almost directly and exclusively under the control and remit of the local authority and its partner organisations. So I think a massive pat on the back for all the council to get so high on that particular area is an amazing achievement. 35th overall when we look at multiple indices of deprivation. No, it isn't good, but that's the evidence, that's the starting point, the evidence that shows that concerted programs of targeted intervention are always needed, because we're not talking about one-off indices of deprivation, we're talking about multiple indices of deprivation where particular households, streets or communities are actually blighted by a whole range of issues. It's not just worklessness or ill health, it's the whole lot, plus poor environment, plus crime, all almost ganged up as one big assault on particular neighbourhoods in Bolton. And I'm also really pleased that you in the presentation you said that deprivation data is not ideal for looking back and comparing. Absolutely spot on, Emily, absolutely spot on, because local authorities and their partners can spend an awful lot of time and money lifting people out of poverty and changing people's lives, only to be replaced by new communities or different people, and the demographics have a lot to say on this. And so it's never just about targeting money, it's also about national programs, it's about health service, it's about everybody really getting stuck in now, and which leads me on to the past, because neighbourhood management, even when it was at a 2 million budget, was never intended to be a panacea. I mean, nobody, and if anybody did, they were daft to say it, nobody could have ever seriously said neighbourhood management will solve all our ills in the deprived areas. Never intended to do that. It was intended to be targeted funding to tackle multiple indices of deprivation. Now that particular element has finished. Listening to Councillor Muslim, hopefully, certainly under his administration, finished temporarily, because we are now in this review, and I think the chief exec was very keen to do this review. I think it was absolutely 100% the right thing to do a complete review on neighbourhood management. It's actually called area working review, which just adds to the confusion, because the two merged, and unfortunately over the last 2 years neighbourhood management as a concept seems to have disappeared and been replaced by area working. Area working, as we know, is devolved budgets going to members. Neighbourhood management is something completely different. Yes, similar process of a devolved budget, but for specific purposes. And that's where I'm on record of saying this, and will never change my view on this. It could have been handled a lot better in the past, particularly in terms of transparency. So the review is with us. I have been part of that review. It's been great to be part of it. I think there is broad agreement between members of all the main political parties on how we should be going ahead on this. I still think, unfortunately, councillors, and I still think that there is still going to be some areas of disagreement in terms of targeted funding for deprivation, because when we had the political battles in the chamber in 2019, there were members, and I'm sure you're painfully aware of this, there were members who did not and would not accept that a ward like Farnborough needed more support than a ward like Heaton. There were members who were saying that, not based on any fact at all, just their opinion. And unfortunately, it just became a, we moved away from being borough councillors with a remit to tackle deprivation across the borough to individual councillors who were concerned about our own wards, and that's always a pity on both sides of the argument, I will say. It's always a pity. So I really do welcome the review. I think it's been great. I think you've done some amazing work for us, Emily, which is much appreciated. And I think there's a real exciting time, no matter who's in control of the council or what happens after May 6th, there's a really exciting time in front of this council in how it moves on, because the opportunity of real collaboration, real partnership with the public is there, right in our hands, right for taking, and to do some really radical and innovative things with this entire area as we move forward as a council. So much appreciated for the work. Thank you very much.
Okay, Councillor Peel, thank you. Do you want to come back at all, Emily, on anything?
Can I just make one very quick point there, Councillor?
Of course you can. Yes.
Councillor Peel, I just thank you for your feedback on the review. I think the successes of it as they've been so far have been very much down to the participation of the members who are part of that cross-party working group. The one quick point that I wanted to just make was that I feel like I'm getting a lot of credit for this evening's presentation, and I feel like I should squarely pass that credit on to Raf Martinez, my excellent head of service, whose laptop has died on him, so I'm just a stand-in this evening, but I will pass the feedback on, so thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I could go through a list of people. Obviously, Raf is up there along with yourself. Thank you.
Yes, Raf's most certainly is. And we'll go over to Councillor Allen, please, who's standing by for us. Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Emily, for the presentation. It was genuinely good. I echo Councillor Peel's comments, by the way, about our achievements in barriers to housing, or the lack of barriers to housing. So whilst we've got a lot of negatives in terms of employment and deprivation, we are doing some things right, and we deserve credit for that. I've just got a couple of brief comments, really. There are some very positive ideas or concepts in this presentation. Particularly, I'm thinking of the design principles on slide 11 that kind of sets out almost a roadmap of where we should be going. But they are only concepts, of course, and I look forward, perhaps after the review, I look forward to some actions, some measurable actions that might achieve some of those. And then my only other comment, talking about measurable actions, is that I'm a little bit surprised that issues like employment and training don't seem to feature very heavily in this whole presentation, and in fact they're not mentioned at all on the design principles. And yet, as we all know, training and employment are really the only permanent, sustainable route out of deprivation and poverty. So I am a bit surprised that they don't feature a bit more in the presentation. Thanks.
Happy to come back on that, Chair, if that's helpful.
Yes, please do, Emily.
Thank you very much, Councillor Allen. I will just take the opportunity to note that you mentioned measurement there, and particularly outcome measurement, and I think that's something that there's a huge opportunity for us to get better at. across the borough in the future. In terms of employment skills and training, that is a piece of work that's being considered or being moved forward as part of the Vision 2030 work. The idea of this the idea of those design principles is to set up the approach by which we will, as a Bolton family, through the method of area working, tackle any complex challenge that we are trying to face as a borough. So those principles in terms of how we work with people, how we work with our communities, could be applied to employment skills and training. They could be applied to health and social care and deprivation. But I do appreciate that the stats at the beginning of the presentation tonight were a little bit focused on one set of measurements, which I think does absolutely involve income and employment in its criteria. But yeah, if I can just assure you, Councillor Allen, it's certainly not something that we will be forgetting about through the delivery of this model. There was another point that you made, but I can't remember what it was now. Oh, action focus going forward. That's what you mentioned, Councillor Allen. I can absolutely assure you that we will be looking at an implementation plan phased over a period of time for this work, subject to that approval from the LGA, and we will absolutely be focused on action and on doing things well collectively, but we cannot engineer this from just me in my kind of ivory tower in the town hall. We will absolutely need members' help to make this work, and communities' help.
Thanks, Emily. I'm reassured by that, as long as we don't forget the bigger issues and the action plan. So thanks for that. You're doing good work.
Thanks, Emily, and thank you to Councillor Allen. And we'll go over now to Councillor Zaman, please, who wishes to ask a question. Councillor Zaman.
Thank you, Chair. I don't want to ask any question. I just wanted to echo what Councillor Peel said earlier on quite eloquently. But what I do want to say is that people keep asking this question around evidence of improvement. My view is that you will never be able to see that kind of evidence in our deprived areas, no matter what the local authority does, because the issues and problems are so complicated that the local authority alone cannot resolve those issues. What we do with targeted funding, or what we have been doing with targeted funding, is scratching the surface to try to keep things afloat. So I think this notion that somehow neighbourhood management or whatever replaces it will all of a sudden contribute to key performance indicators, or it will give us evidence of improvement over a number of years. I think that will not, that is just not possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zaman. Do you wish to come back on anything Councillor Zaman said?
Yeah, happy to share.
Yes, please do.
Cool. Hi, Councillor Zaman. Nice to see you. I think we have a challenge. I mentioned I think we have a challenge with the way that we've measured things in Bolton in the past, and part of that challenge is that a lot of the data that we currently have is at a very high macro level, and I think that one of the things that we need to get better at as a borough is in understanding the breadth of our kind of what I would term actionable intelligence at a local level. So how you bring together local data, how you look at the evidence that sits behind particular change ideas and how we test those over time, and also broadening our definition of intelligence, so we're incorporating lived experience and insight from our residents in that. That's quite a challenge. It's quite a different way of working, but it's something that I'm quite ambitious for us to drive forward collectively as a system. This isn't just about the council, this is about us working collectively with our partners and residents over the coming years. But yeah, I said it is difficult to look at change on a very high level data source.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Emily, and thank you to Councillor Zaman. I think that brings us to the end of this agenda item because nobody else has indicated to speak. So could I thank you, Emily, for presenting to us tonight, and please pass on our thanks to Raphael, who put the presentation together, and for the work he is doing in this area for the council as well. And also, Councillor Peel has asked if these slides which you presented this evening can be shared. I thought they had been circulated to members in advance of the meeting. Could you clarify that, Vicky?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, they were emailed out to members. I think it was on Friday. Oh,
Councillor Peel, yes, he's clarified. Could they be issued to all members of the council? So I understand what he was asking for now. Are you able to do that, to send to all members of the council?
Yeah, I will do that, Chair. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for asking for that, Councillor Peel. So we move on with the agenda. We come to agenda item number 9 now, and this is a discussion on the Greater Manchester Pension Fund. Councillor Hayes asked for this item to come to the Scrutiny Committee, and this followed a motion at the March 2019 meeting of the council. I'll just read the motion out, which council passed back then, so members can refresh their memories, and members of the public watching will understand what we're now going to discuss. That motion, which was passed for the council, called to immediately freeze any new investment in fossil fuel companies, including those engaged in fracking operations and exploration, divest investments from any company that is involved in the exploration or for production of coal and unconventional oil or gas fracking, in brackets, within 2 years, and from all fossil fuel companies within 5 years. Work with the Greater Manchester Combined Authority to develop and fund a sustainable low carbon investment programme for Greater Manchester. So that's what the council passed in March 2019 with regards to the Greater Manchester Pension Fund. Members have been circulated with reports previous to this meeting by email. So this item is open for discussion. So if any members wish to indicate in the chat box or to unmute if they wish to speak in this discussion, please do so. And we'll go over to Councillor Hayes, who asked for this item to be brought to committee this evening. So Councillor Hayes, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. A bit more about the background first. I mean, I think we've all accepted that even with the pandemic, that the climate crisis is one of the major problems this world faces, and there's been a lot done in local councils. The concern really about the pension scheme is that the Greater Manchester Fund is the largest pension scheme in Britain, very large scheme, and it had massive amounts invested in fossil fuel companies. And 2 years ago, as you said, quite rightly, the council passed the motion. It wasn't unanimous, but a significant majority at the time, asking that the pension fund be given Bolton's view that we should be disinvesting from fossil fuel companies in a fairly measured way and not putting any new investments. And I really wanted, first of all, to know what reaction we'd got from other bodies, because part of the motion said that we should inform all other employers and interested bodies of this council's view and ask for their support. What we're getting tonight doesn't really tell us what reaction we got there. Knowing the efficient way in which the council does pass views about our motions onto other authorities, I'm sure we did it. But everybody I've spoken to in contacting other councils, none of them are aware that we were asking for support. So I'd like some feedback either tonight or at some other stage, not too long away, of what reaction we actually did get. We then got a very detailed report before us saying all the things that the pension funds are going to have to do, what they're going to look at, etc. And that the Greater Manchester Fund is in, I think, 25% better situation than many other pension funds. But it doesn't say, unless it's in very small print somewhere, it doesn't say that they are actually going to start some process of disinvestment. In one part of the report, I was rather amazed by the councillor from Tameside's comments that seemed very dismissive. Didn't seem to think that being invested in fossil fuels did put the pensions at risk. I think anybody who thinks through, if in fact we do stop using fossil fuels, then investments in companies that deal with that are going to be a lot less lucrative than they were. And it is obviously going to put the pensions at future generations of local government employees at considerable risk. So I'm really hoping that beyond what we've got, which is a bit, as I say, I think a little bit wishy-washy in places, are they actually going to do this? What is the position with investment in fracking companies now compared with when the motion was passed? Is it the same? Is it less? Is it more? Because fracking hasn't gone away. People like to pretend it has, but those licenses are still there, and the government can initiate that very quickly if it wishes to. And I know that there are people in the government who believe that fracking is a very valuable power source for us. I'd like to know that. So it doesn't really tell us a lot, Chair. And I'm rather hoping that we can get a bit more information on that, because it is a very, very important issue. As I say, the eye's been taken off the ball a bit because of COVID recently, which again is an immediate problem. But the climate calamity, the climate crisis is very, very worrying. Now, I see John Walsh is going to speak. John's in rather an unfortunate position because he's only been our rep on the pension committee for a very, very short time. And the person who has been on the committee for basically nearly 2 years isn't now in that position through various activities within the Conservative group. But I'm sure John Walsh will enlighten us. But we do need a bit more facts, some simple answers to some fairly simple questions. Are they going to do it? Have they started doing it? Is there any plan to do it? Thank you, Chair.
Well, thank you very much, Councillor Hayes, and please stand by, and if you wish to ask any further questions, just unmute, and I'll take you if you want to come in at any stage. We are going to go over to Councillor Walsh, Councillor John Walsh, who is the council's representative on the Greater Manchester Pension Fund. I know that you've recently been appointed. It's only been a few weeks, and I believe it was Councillor Parkinson before yourself who was our representative on the pension fund. But have you any update, Councillor Walsh, which you can give to Councillor Hayes on what occurred after the council passed the motion, and anything about what Councillor Hayes has been asking? Has any divestments in fossil fuel companies occurred since the council passed the motion? If we can go over to yourself, Councillor Walsh.
Thank you, Chairman. In direct answer to your question, the answer is no. I have no, like to Councillor Hayes. The first information I've had from the pension fund since I was appointed 3 weeks ago now. I lose track of such an extended time period. The first communication I've had is the one which is the bundle before us this evening. So, quite frankly, no, I cannot. I understand from inquiries I've made as a result of receiving these papers that the leaders on this subject, 10 leaders of the Greater Manchester authorities at a previous meeting. I'm not sure exactly when that was and what that report said, but I will undertake, if I continue to be a member of this august body, that I will continue to the points from the notice of motion. I take seriously the fact democratic process was that the council carried a resolution. If that is the case, then I will happily take that matter forward and ensure that Councillor Hayes gets a more substantive reply than the bundle before us this evening.
Can I come back, Chair?
You certainly can, Councillor Hayes.
Yes, I have a lot of sympathy with the position Councillor Walsh is in, and I wouldn't want to push him at the moment on this. I must say, I took rather a bit of exception to Councillor Brenda Warrington's comments, where she was rather dismissive. It is a very serious issue. He's hinting that this is politically driven. What isn't, at the end of the day? What isn't politically driven? There is a lot of politics around it, but there is genuine concern about this. And I'm very happy, in view of this, to give Councillor Walsh a bit more time to get more facts and to take it into a cooler period to ask for a report back after the local elections. And if I still am a member of this council at that time, I'll listen with interest. If I'm not still a member of the council at that time, I will still look at it with a lot of interest. So I think that's probably the best way forward, but I don't want to put Councillor Walsh in a difficult position. But it is important. There's lots of arguments, and I think we should be doing something very serious about our investments through this pension fund. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. We'll go over to Councillor David Greenhouse, the leader of Bolton Council, and I don't know if you have any further information for us, Councillor Greenhouse.
Thank you, Chair. I don't have a great deal of information. I'm trying to recollect just when exactly the original motion was. I'm pretty sure I think it might have been in about late 2018, early 2019. I don't know if Councillor Hayes is able to just tell me exactly when it was. It
was actually in March 2019.
Yes, yeah, I can remember I was sat on the opposition benches, and when it happened, that's what I was trying to remember. Because soon becoming leader, I attended a leaders. It would probably be in October, November. A GMCA meeting actually, where it was discussed, and it was actually following a period, I don't know if any of you remember, of actual action that was being taken by environmental groups who actually stormed the Tameside Council buildings, because Brenda Warrington, as leader of Tameside, leader of the Labour group in Tameside, is chair of the GM Pensions Board. She read a very, very long speech out at that meeting, backing the actions of the GM Pensions Fund and the decisions it was made, and indeed many of the comments that were made in the debate that we had in our chamber. I don't want to put words into Councillor Warrington's mouth, really. I am paraphrasing from memory here, but it was about some justification of some of the funding in terms of some of the green initiatives that many of these companies actually take part of themselves. I don't want to put words into another councillor's from another borough's mouth, actually, but all I can say is that meeting took place. There was anger at the direct action that had been taken by some groups in terms of the vandalism and the strength of feeling that had been expressed and the way that they'd gone about it. But I don't think any change in policy was signified. But I think what Councillor Hayes has suggested is very fair, and I think if Councillor Walsh is in that position, or whoever is, if we can wait till after the local elections to fully feed back, I think that's probably the best option. But that is as much information as I know, Chair.
Okay, I think Councillor Hayes, you'll be happy with that. So, and it also depends. Also, if I'm here after the local elections, if I'm still the chair of this committee. But yes, it would be very helpful if a report could come back to this scrutiny committee with an update from Councillor Walsh, who will still be a member of the council, whether he'll be a member of representative on our pension fund, that is also to be seen. So it all depends on the local elections. I think we're all agreed on that. but whoever is the chair of this committee, if it's me or somebody else, if they can put this item back onto the agenda, that would be appreciated. So we'll leave it there. Is that okay, Councillor Hayes?
Come back very briefly, Chair.
Okay.
I think on a broader point, I think it's important when this council passes a motion that there's some feedback about what happens. This is just one case.
Yes, I do agree, because I had wondered what happens when the council passes a motion. Where does it go? Is it discussed properly, etc.? So yeah, I completely agree. But we'll come back to this item after the local elections. So therefore, thank you for that, Councillor Hayes and Councillor Greenhalgh. We now go to item 10 on our agenda, which is members' questions 10A. Is there any members' questions, Vicky?
No. Sorry, Chair. No, we haven't received any.
Thank you. So we go to item 10B. This is the extracts of decisions arising from the minutes of other meetings relevant to the remit of this committee. And we have been circulated previous to this meeting by email cabinet minutes held on the 8th of March 2021, executive cabinet members leaders portfolio held on the 5th, 9th and 29th of March 2021, and executive cabinet member stronger communities portfolio held on the 9th of March 2021. Could I ask if any member has any comments or questions on any of those minutes to please unmute and let me know now.
Move on block.
Nobody's unmuted, so we note all of those minutes.
Agreed.
So that brings us to the end of this scrutiny committee and to the end of this municipal year for these meetings, and we are going to go over to let me see, Councillor Madassadeen.
Arlene Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you know, as is tradition, this is the last meeting of the municipal year, and I would like to thank you for chairing these meetings and all the hard work that you've put in. In particular, I'd like to thank you for playing such a great tribute to our recently deceased, the former, His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh, our former leader of Bolton Council and a former mayoress. I think that was a very warm tribute, straight from the heart, and I think all the council echoes that tribute. And so thank you for your work, not only today but during the year as well. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Councillor Dean, for that. And I think I've been the first virtual chair of the Corporate and External Scrutiny Committee in history, perhaps. I don't think any other chair has conducted meetings quite like we have done over the past municipal year. So it's certainly been an experience, and I want to thank all members for their participation throughout the year, for asking all of your questions, and to all of our officers at Bolton Council who've presented us throughout the municipal year. We've certainly had a very full work programme, and we've also had officers from outside organisations such as Robertson's this evening and the police earlier in the year. So thank you to all of our officers and external officers, and to the members of the public for watching these meetings either on YouTube or live on the council website. But that does bring us to the end of this municipal year. So I wish everybody well over the local elections from whichever party you are standing in, to all of the candidates, and good luck to everybody, and farewell for this municipal year. I hope to be back next year with you, but good evening.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Chair.